everybody. How's everybody doing out there today? Hope everyone's ready for the weekend, had a wonderful week. Let's start off with a little news update before we get into everything today. First up, today is going to be, we're going to take a little break on ocean stories for a bit. It's going to be one of our last ocean stories for the next 2 weeks. We're working on some new ideas to keep ocean stories running and all that, but we're taking a little break to get everything ironed out and all that. So we'll be back in about 1 to 2 weeks. We should be making an update online in about sometime later next week. So make sure to follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and all that, and check out the Ocean Stories webpage for updates too. And those that are on the Ocean Stories mailing list will be sending out an email with info and all that. But in the meantime, too, all the past episodes we've been doing for these last 3 months are still all available online to watch for free on our website. And we have a ton of awesome, incredible diving and conservation courses that have been going on too. This weekend, starting today, we're gonna have a special weekend of online conservation courses too. We've got whale conservation today, the whale defender course that I wrote with Maru and Mario. That'll be happening today, right after Ocean Stories. And then tomorrow we kick off with a Project Aware sea turtle conservation course. And then on Sunday, we've got Ellen coming to give an Intro to Ocean Conservation course. Then on Monday morning, whale shark conservation, and lots of good stuff. Then also next weekend, I'm teaching a special underwater photography course on Saturday, June 13th. So if you're starting on your journey into underwater photography, this is definitely one you want to check out. Normally, this is a course we teach at Dive Ninjas for about $400, but we're doing a special project with this and everything like that, and we're actually offering a $300 and something discount on the course. So it's a way to take a course that's normally very, very expensive for like a third of the price. You can find out all more info on these on our Dive Ninjas website. I'll throw the link in the chat in a few minutes. But before we get into the weekend, today we have an incredible person joining us. I first met him on a citizen science trip a few years ago with his research group, Pacific Manta Research, aboard the Kino El Guardian liveaboard here in Mexico. It's a week I definitely won't forget for a long, long, long time, and actually would go on to become part of our inspiration for creating Dive Ninjas and what we do with Dive Ninjas. So needless to say, I'm super excited to have him on the show today. Dr. Rubin has been researching mantas for over 25 years. His research on manta rays has been the subject of numerous productions for the Discovery Channel, Nat Geo, Animal Planet, and so many more. And his resume of accomplishments, accolades is just incredible. I mean, he is an incredible, incredible human, and we're super happy to have him on today. So without further ado, good morning, Dr. Rubin. How are we doing today, Bob?
Good morning, Jay. Can you hear me there?
Yeah, we can hear you perfect. How's everything going?
Oh, it's really nice to see you. Thanks for having me on this. I just think it's a real honor to be here. And of course, I love talking about manta rays. I also like seeing you, but not as much as the manta rays. So all goes well, and it's just a pleasure. And I hope your colleagues and viewers enjoy these wonderful beasts because they are magic beyond belief.
Awesome. Well, we're looking forward to it. When you're ready, we can share your screen and we'll get started with the presentation. Perfect. There we go. I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, Jay, thank you very much. Good morning, folks. My name is Bob Rubin, as Jay has indicated, and I'm going to speak with you a little bit today about manta rays, which you see in the title, Flying Carpets of Ebony Silk. That was my first impression of them when I started working on them a long time ago. And this particular talk is not a scientific talk. It's a talk about thought. And I was first asked to give this talk as part of a TED Talk presentation. And the folks asked me not to talk about science so much. They wanted to know about what my thoughts were after years of working with these animals and seeing them in the wild. Not so much about the scientific data that we collected, but my thoughts about the animals. And so I'm going to share those with you. It's a story. It's an ocean story. And it's not something that we can publish in scientific journals. It's a series of emotional thoughts, perception, I hope, but nonetheless, the way I feel about these animals and some of the ideas that have come to my mind after thousands of hours of spending time with them. So the original title of this was, as you see in the slide, Convergence to the Edge of Consciousness. And it's a discussion about, is it possible, theoretically possible, that animals other than humans have a sense of consciousness. And it's strictly a thought. It's a nice thought, and I like it, and we'll try and do the best we can. And I have been diving with manta rays all over the world, and I see here that I can't vote, but nonetheless, there's a little voting screen up here, and you can vote, and I hope you have seen them, and if you haven't, I really encourage you to do so. So let's start. Let's take a look at what might go on here in terms of the story. This began a number of years ago in an early morning dive in the southern Sea of Cortez on a seamount. And in that moment, in the early dawn, we entered the water to start a film on sharks. The water was green like Baja often is, and we dove down through the thermocline, and it became clearer as we got to the top of a seamount, maybe at 100 feet. And in the shadows of the early morning light, there was movement on the top of the seamount, a flashing of white. And as we approached, we saw that this was a large female manta ray in a net, trapped, and her face badly torn, the wing badly torn, and she was frantic in the net. But as we approached, she became still, quiet. You would think that an animal trapped like that would be frightened, but she was not. And when we saw the situation, we frantically started to cut her out of the net, and she remained just still in the moment. And it took a few moments, and we were moving around her with knives and so on to try and get her out of this net, trying to untangle her and so on. And in the moment she was released, and we got the net away, and she was gone into the green with 2 strokes. And we were so pleased with ourselves that we had freed her. We collected the net, took it to the surface, and sat on the back of the boat cheering the morning's adventure and acts what we thought might have been of goodwill. And as we sat on the edge of the boat, we looked around, and there she was, right behind the boat, not out at a distance, but right there, meaning we could have jumped off the dive platform on top of her. So we quickly maxed snorkels into the water, and we swam with her, and she just stayed motionless, moved a little here, a little there, and we asked ourselves, can we touch her? And so the idea was that maybe we could touch the edge of the wing. And as we did, she stayed still and she shivered. And then, of course, the next thought was, can we get any closer? And so we crept up on the wing, closer to the midline of her body. Now, this animal is maybe 16, 17 feet across. So when you're laying on the wing, your fins are touching the tip as your hand is touching the mid-body. And she shivered, but she didn't move. And then, of course, the ultimate question, and this is a long time ago when there weren't rules and problems with riding, we asked the question, is it possible that we could ride her? And so the idea was to just lay on top and hold on to her upper lip, which is maybe 2.5 feet across. And as people attempted such a silly feat, off she went. And she took us riding. And down the seamount and up the seamount and sideways, so you would hang in space unless you let go. And because we only had mask and snorkel, we had to let go. We went back to the boat, people put on scuba, went into the water, and this went on, and she came back, parking by the end of the boat, as if it was her personal parking spot for loading. Off the back, individuals went, onto the back of the animal, on for another ride. And this went on for the better part of the afternoon. And she didn't go away. And then finally, at the end, when we stopped going in the water to ride her because we were tired and we couldn't go in the water anymore, not only because of our fatigue, but also because we're in deep water on scuba and so on. And so when it ended, we sat on the back of the boat. She came around a few times, and then like a flash in the green light of the depth, she was also gone, not to be seen again. So we looked at this animal, and she was forevermore, in my mind at least, frozen. And I started to think about understanding this group of animals, and I wasn't able to find much in the literature. Nobody knew much about mantas, and so I started working on them, and that was the beginning really of my particular interest in mantas. I'd been working on seals before that. But nonetheless, these magic animals captured my attention, and of course the beauty is startling. And to be able to approach animals in the wilderness like this, wild animals that come to you and stay with you and seem to embrace your presence, was something that I had never experienced. And so it began the work. And we've been doing it for a very long time ever since. And one of the things I'd like to introduce you to is an idea called convergent evolution that biologists use to understand many of the things that we do and we see in the wild. This is an example of one that you'll know, and this just shows you in the foreground an ichthyosaur, an extinct reptile, a porpoise, a dolphin that you know and understand, of course, and then a shark. And you can see how similar they are structurally, even though they're quite different animals. One is a reptile, one is an air-breathing mammal, and the other is a gill-breathing shark. The reptiles, of course, are now extinct. But the point is that they all look very much alike, and you know the similarity between sharks and dolphins. They've come from completely different ancestors. One is a reptile, as I said, one is a mammal, and one is a primitive fishes that we call a shark. And so what we're seeing here is that they look the same, even though they're evolutionarily derived from very different groups. And the reason they look the same is because they have the same role in the sea, and we call that convergence. So there is convergence in their design, in their body shape, because they do similar things. They are high-speed, aggressive marine predators. They feed on fish. They have to be fast in order to do so. They have to be streamlined in order to be fast. They all have teeth, and they have powerful tails to drive them forward, and many other adaptations that they all share, even though they're so very different evolutionary. So the question becomes, is there another type of convergence? Could there be convergence in behavior? Could there be convergence in many other aspects of their biology? And we know the answer to that is true. Yes, there can be. And now the question is there convergence, a possible convergence in the way their neurological arrangement, their brains develop and also learn? So one of the ideas was to look at the indirect evidence that might support that. And the first question that we asked when looking at these animals, and particularly the animal that befriended us, is what kind of an act was that? Was it altruistic? Was it a payback for helping her? Was it just that she wanted to make friends? All of those kinds of things cross your mind, of course, because you're a human. And who knows? It's very difficult to test and measure scientifically, so it's just a thought. But it's such unusual behavior that it's not only charming, but it brings things to your attention about the way brains work. Now, this is a picture of your brain. This is the Halloween brain, so to speak. And we see two parts of this that are really important to us. One is called the cerebrum, which is the upper portion that's all convoluted and folded, and the cerebellum, which is also convoluted and folded. The cerebrum is important in our brains in that it's very, very large. And we have brains that are about 7 times larger than you'd expect for an animal of our size. Most of that expansion comes from the cerebrum, and the folding is also in the cerebrum. And the result of this expansion and folding is to give more surface area for more nerve cells. And of course, then our brains are not only filled with a large number, disproportionately large, nerve cell components in different areas, but it's also the place where we have most of our positive and negative conscious thought, learning, problem solving, love, interpretation of puzzles, serious thought, reading, and so on. The cerebellum is also convoluted, and it's primarily a function of that convolution that gives us our motor skills, your golf swing, and some memory also. So these two areas are expanded in the human brain to make it much, much larger than you would expect for an animal of our body mass. Let's take a look at a shark brain. And this is a fairly well-defined image of a brain. It could be a white shark, it's a dogfish shark, but it could be a white shark or any number of things, a mako. And when you look at this brain is elongated, and you can see that the cerebrum are just two little bulges anteriorly, primarily associated with smell, and that the cerebellum is in line with that, and none of these are particularly large, and none are highly convoluted and folded. Interestingly, this is the way your brain looks at about the 4th week of development. All of these components are present, and they are elongated like this from front to back. They are not folded, they are not convoluted. This is typical for manta rays in the past, we think, and manta rays maybe not ever. So maybe we would say this is typical of sharks and most rays. So let's look at a manta brain. Here's a manta brain. Mantas are very recent. They've probably been on the planet less than 1 million years. They are the most highly evolved or derived, we say in biology, of the elasmobranch fishes, meaning showing the largest number of specialized and unusual characters that make them unique among their group. And their group, of course, includes sharks and other rays. And here we see in mantas, the cerebrum is much, much larger and folded into 2 large hemispheres anteriorly, much bigger than what we saw, and pushed back, unlike the shark brains, toward the cerebellum, which is expanded greatly as well, and they're fused in length and convoluted in the case of the cerebellum. The surface area has been increased dramatically. As we increase the surface area, of course, there's more potential for interaction between nerve cells. These guys have very large brains, much, much larger than you would expect for their body size, like humans. They're not quite that large. And they're the largest brains of any fish when scaled to body size, meaning, of course, a large animal would have a large brain. But when you scale it to body size, you adjust for the difference in body mass, and these brains are decisively large. So we take the next step and we say, this is an interesting brain, and it seems to have specializations that suggest, and that's all, suggest similar advances in the way brains may work. And it's not just by chance, or is it? That it's the cerebellum and the cerebrum that are expanded and folded just like they are in us. That may be nothing more than a coincidence, or not. The next thing we see is here's the manta brain and its association with blood vessels. And in this particular case, you can hardly see the brain. It's back there in white, as you can see, and it's covered with red and blue. And the red and blue are blood vessels. It's called a rete. And the rete have veins shown to you in blue and arteries shown to you in red, and they intertwine with one another, and the blood flows flow in opposite directions. We call it anti-parallel. So the blood moving in the vein going in the opposite direction of the blood moving in the arteries. When we see this, and it requires somewhat of an explanation, maybe for another time, we're looking at a heating structure. This is a heater, and it's capturing warm blood that comes from the swimming muscles in the wings and bringing it to the brain and running it back and forth, so to speak, to heat the brain. So mantas and other animals as well heat their brains. The rest of their body is cold, just like the seawater, but the brain temperature is high. this is like us. We have high body temperatures all the way through, but in mantas, we're seeing that they heat their brains, they probably heat their eyes as well, and that's something we'd like to know and work on. Why heat the brain? And the idea is that chemical reactions go faster at higher temperatures. You have an example of this when you have hot tea and iced tea on the table in cups of the same size. If you put sugar in the hot tea and stir it once, it dissolves. Fast chemical reactions. If you put sugar in the cold tea and stir it once, it doesn't dissolve. It goes to the bottom, and you have to stir and stir and stir, and even then, it may not go into solution. Slower chemical reactions at lower temperatures. So if you have a big brain and you want to process quickly, you heat it. And this is not unique to mantas in the entire world. That is to say, all mantas are like this, but there are other animals that have similar heaters, not quite as complex as this one, but that can heat their eyes, like swordfish heat only their eyes. And certain other animals like the big sharks, white sharks, makos, and so on, have heating elements in their musculature that allow them to heat their intestinal tract and their swimming muscles. But this is an unusual one in that it heats the brain. So we have big brains, heated brains, and all it suggests to us is interesting, but is this to run faster chemical reactions in brains that are much more complex than we realize? We start to put together the ideas of these brains and what this complex might allow us. And here we see behavioral interactions. This is a mating train of mantas. The animal coming out of your screen is a female, and all the ones in the back are males. This is courtship behavior. And sometimes this may be a single female followed by 10 or 15, maybe more adult males. And it's a type of behavior that is complex. It may go on for several days. The female goes through all kinds of interesting, graceful moves in the ocean. She spins and she turns and she arches. She goes faster, slower, and the males follow in sequence, almost as if it's been choreographed. And the line, as with time, diminishes, and the line gets progressively smaller, and only a few males remain, and the remaining males will mate, or the remaining single male will mate with the female. The actual mating we've only seen twice in the wild. It's on video in one particular case, and it takes 10 seconds. So it's several days sometimes of interaction. It's complicated and surprisingly complicated until the female accepts a male, and the other males fall out of the competition, if that's the correct term. They don't fight. At the very end, there is some interaction between the last couple of males. But other than that, they stay in line and dutifully follow. Here's an image of a small mobula ray, and you can see this little guy is tiny, and you can see the long stalk that extends from the belly area. This is like an umbilical cord going to your belly button, and it goes to a yolk sac that is not on the screen. And usually at the bottom of this cut off long blue strip would be yolk, just like a chicken yolk, that nourishes the little guy. In utero, mantas develop a single pup inside the uterus on one side only. The other side doesn't work, so to speak. So only one half of the reproductive system is working, and they give birth to one pup probably every 2 years. The gestation period, the developmental period, is almost exactly a year, and we know that from 2 captive animals that mated in captivity in an aquarium in Tokyo, and we know when they gave birth. We don't know it from the wild, but we assume that that's correct. The amount of food that's available to the little guy in the yolk is limited to about a 6-month supply. And so at the end of half of the developmental period, the puppy runs out of yolk. And now it'll die in utero because there's no food. But the end of this is a good story, because as the yolk disappears, large finger-like extensions grow out of the inside of the uterine wall of the mom. And these long finger-like extensions enter the mouth and to some degree the gills of the developing embryo. Those long extensions secrete milk. And so for the next 6 months, the little guy is suckling milk from its mother's extended papillae, if you will, very much like mammals would nurse from their mothers from the breasts. The only difference is that these little guys are inside of the uterus, and as mammals, we are born before we suckle. This seems very sophisticated, and it seems as if this is a very highly adapted form of reproduction. It occurs in other animals. Hammerheads do this also. And they are, interestingly enough, the most highly derived species of sharks. As many of you know, mantas are plankton feeders. They feed on small things, krill, opossum, shrimp, and so on in very large numbers, like the great whales, like humpbacks and blue whales and so on. And interestingly enough, they feed in a number of different ways. But here's another interesting behavioral modification that may be very common, but we only see a few places in the world. And this is in a small bay in the Indian Ocean, where you see animals in very large numbers circling in the bay. And if you look carefully, all these guys are going in a counterclockwise fashion. Also, if you look carefully, they're in groups of 3. And in the front picture, you can see 3 animals with their fins folded and their mouths open. And now they are doing an amazing behavioral feat that is complicated and cooperative. All these animals are swimming in groups of 3 in a circle, and they're creating a vortex of water like the water going out of your sink. And that vortex of water is pushing the plankton to the edge of the circle. And so the mantas swim and develop the circle. The mantas are pushed away from the center and out to the edges. And the mantas then cooperatively keep the flow going in a cylindrical fashion and feed in groups of 3. And the reason for this groups of 3 appears to be that the first manta at the bottom gets a big mouthful, but the water hits her face and goes up to the next level. And so the next animal, which is a male, a smaller guy in between, gets food from the offshoot of the female and the flow of the circle. The third manta, which is also a female at the top, is taking advantage of the water that's coming off the face of the second animal and also the circle, and gets food cooperatively from the efforts of the 2 comrades, if you will, below. The speck that you see in the water, all those particles, that's plankton. And so these animals are cooperatively feeding. They're making the circle together and feeding cooperatively to maximize the uptake of nutrients individually. 3 seems to be the optimum number. Every once in a while, you'll see 2, but 3 seems to be the way in which they do business. This is amazing behavior. They're altering the environment and then cooperatively. And then they, of course, are cooperatively feeding. Is this just random kinds of stuff? It seems really smart to me. And I don't know that. We can't prove intelligence here. We're just seeing indications of things that we might interpret that way. And we're humans, we're not manta rays. One of the other interesting characters is that they have passed what we call the mirror test. And this has been done by a wonderfully clever scientific investigator, a woman that has worked in aquariums with mantas and changed their images to themselves, meaning their sense of how they look. If somebody put a bunch of black dots on your face and you looked in the mirror, you would recognize yourself, but you would realize that something is wrong, that those don't belong there. But you certainly have a sense of self. You know who you are. And that's, of course, the tragedy of Alzheimer's disease, losing your sense of self. The research that has been done in this regard shows that mantas have a sense of self. They pass the mirror test. The only other animals that do this are humans and all the primates, monkeys, chimpanzees, and so on. Dolphins can do this. They pass the mirror test. They know who they are. Elephants pass the mirror test. They know who they are. And with that exception, there may be other animals, but those are the ones that we know. Now, of course, dolphins are mammals. Elephants are mammals. Humans and primates are mammals. This is a fish. It's supposed to be a primitive, cold fish. Interesting, is it not? Now, when we finally put all these things together into a little capsule, what have we shown? We have shown that the animal, through a series of intuitive insights on our part, shows an unusual behavior, and we can account for it in part and speculatively by their large brain and the fact that they heat the brain. Our interactions with these animals are unbelievable. The way they come to us, we're pretty sure that they know us. They will allow some people to pet them, and in the old days to ride them. And now the people that were allowed can still do it, suggesting they have a memory. And the people that were disallowed for reasons that are not clear to us are still disallowed. So the animals seem to have a memory of some kind of past, and this is more recent than the one that we saved, if you will. They come to us, they seem to know us, they hang out with us, and it's startling. People that see this for the first time are absolutely dumbfounded, speechless in some cases. And I am too, and I tell students occasionally, the first secret of great science is to love the work. And if you're reasonably bright, you can do good work. So I beg the question, and I say to you the following, which I think is true, and in the world today, as we see it, I think it's more true than ever. And this comes from a great physical anthropologist who gave up anthropology to write philosophically, insightfully about the human condition and his perceptions of it. Lauren Isley, The Immense Journey, and many other books. And he says to you, the need is no longer for a larger brain. And he was referring to looking at the way the brain in humans developed very quickly as they learned how to use tools, but rather for a gentler, more tolerant people than those that won for us against the ice, the tiger, and the bear. And this may well be true. And of course, the difference between mantas and humans is that they lack hands. And you make tools with hands, not only axes and fire, but also nuclear weapons. It is difficult for me to imagine that an organism that is capable neurologically, capable enough to make a nuclear weapon would. And so maybe we're seeing a different type of consciousness. And the absence of hands selects for different kinds of behavior, and certainly the manufacturing of tools is not part of it. So maybe Isley is quite right. The need is no longer for a larger brain. And in the absence of hands, but rather for a gentler, more tolerant people than those that won for us against the ice, the tiger, and the bear. This happens to be the love of my life, and I am so happy to share it with you. I wish you all well. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Bob. That was incredible. Thank you so much. So guys, let's open up some questions. If anyone's got questions, you can type them into the Q&A box. If you click on the little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and then we can open it up. Let's see, we got a couple questions already coming in. Let me pull it open. All right, so let's start. Julia says, thank you so much for sharing your photos, thoughts, and expertise. I got to scuba with a couple of oceanic manta rays for over an hour earlier this year. And I can't stop thinking about how I felt when they came close and we looked into each other's eyes. It was a very special and moving experience. Thank you for your work.
Julia, you are not only most welcome, but you are also awfully lucky and very perceptive. You have a sense of what we are all feeling and what I'm trying to convey. It's not good science, but boy, it is something that will never leave my brain. And the emotional part of this is a very big step toward understanding who we are and perhaps who we can be. Thank you for asking.
Awesome. So Sue says, hi Bob, awesome to see you again. Question, do you think one day we will discover that mantas have culture like orcas, and have like orcas have hunting or different hunting and vocalization cultures by family? Or does the lack of parental care in mantas make this more unlikely?
That's a really great question. If you want to take my course, you're more than welcome. I won't charge you the tuition. It's hard to know that, but your perception is, I think, really valid. That orcas, of course, are mammals, and they're extraordinarily complex. They have big brains, as you undoubtedly know, and their social systems are amazing. Now, one of the things that I would offer, and that's all it is just a thought. We don't know very much about the reproductive areas and birthing of mantas. We have not ever seen at the areas that I work in, young mantas, little tiny guys that are only a meter across. And the pregnant females are gone during the latter parts of their pregnancy. We don't see a lot of pregnant females, but they go, we think, into deeper water to give birth. We don't know this a little bit now, more than ever. And then when we see them, they come back without babies. And so some people speculate that there are kindergartens for young animals where they learn social behavior. I don't know if this is true or not. That hasn't been diagnosed or demonstrated to my satisfaction. But we do see areas in the world where there are smaller mantas in groups. And those kindergartens may be a way of learning some type of behavior. Mantas show a lot of interaction that I haven't touched on here, interaction that is not aggressive, or at least it's not interpreted as being aggressive. So I think that the question remains unanswered. I would love it if we could show that, because I so believe that these animals are so different. But of course, orcas are in a class all by themselves, and I can't at this point say anything except I hope so. Thank you for the question.
Awesome. Jose asks, he says, that was amazing, Bob. Just out of interest, do you know how many neurons are in a manta brain, and how does this compare to humans?
Jay, you can take the class for free too. No, it's not known. The woman that did the mirror test, Celia Ari, is a neurobiologist, and she has written a small but very good book, very expensive. It's only about the size of Skin Diver magazine in terms of thickness, but it's expensive because it has a limited audience, and it's about elasmobranch brains. And not only just the physical measurements and things, but also a dissection of the brains and talking about connections and so on and so forth. And that book suggests that the number of neurons in mantas are expanded greatly, numerically. And it's not only the number of neurons, but it's the number of connections that each one would make. So in your brain, each neuron makes about 5 to 8 to 10,000 connections. And connections can be made throughout a lifetime in humans. So if you want to learn how to play the piano, you're a kid, but if I want to learn how to play the piano and I'm not a kid, I could still learn. It might be slower because my hands don't go as fast, but nonetheless, we can make connections throughout our entire lifetime. We can't get more cells, although that may even not be true now. But nonetheless, the answer to your question is no, we don't know. And the numbers are very difficult to come up with. You know, you have to measure stuff like that in a very tedious way. In us, it's said to be about 3 trillion individual cells, and each cell would make 5 to 10,000 connections. And the total number then of possibilities exceeds the number of atoms in the known universe. So it's startling. Brains are startling, and gosh, I'd love to know that kind of stuff, but I don't have an answer for you. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's incredible, though. That's a lot to take in. It's amazing to think of. So Coral says, thank you so much for sharing. I learned a lot today. Do you think mantas have emotions, given your experience with freeing one from the net?
Yes. I think they do. I know that they of course can show certain kinds of things that are primal, like fear and aggression, although I've never seen aggression, not toward people or really toward other animals. But I think they absolutely do. And I think the way that they interact with you, these long fins in the front, which you know as cephalic fins that they use for feeding, can also be electrosensors, as you know about sharks and so on. And so when you approach these animals, they will unroll the fin. It's rolled up in like a corkscrew when they swim, presumably to reduce drag. They open it to feed, but also they'll open it on the side that you approach them on and wave them like a spatula in the water. And they're getting an electrical image of who you are. And they say, oh yes, this is a human, and oh yes, this is Jay. I've seen Jay before, and this is in my memory. Now, all that is speculative, but it seems to be a response to bring into a memory, which we do all the time, about something. Say, oh yeah, I know this person. It's facial recognition. It's this, it's that. We know not to fear this person. We know that this person has been nice to us, and so on and so forth. We don't know that about mantas. But I think absolutely their behavior and curiosity, of course, is a type of emotion. It's a type of intelligence. And you've been around them as much as most people, and you know that they are remarkably curious for whatever reason. You know, they come close, they look you right in the eye. And, you know, sometimes you can be half a foot away if you choose to. And they're not zooming away, they're looking at you. You can watch them track you. And that's of course, a cat will do that. But I do think there's an emotional response, and that's again just an intuitive sense more than a scientific sense.
It's incredible. Even seeing them even out in Socorro and stuff, where you have one with you on a dive, and then 3 dives later or the next day, you see the same one come back from the blue as almost they spotted you from a distance and swimming right up to you, like they want to say hello, like they know who you are. They're like, hey, it's my friend from yesterday, like coming
Yes.
right up to you. It's
Yes. I mean, why else would they come?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and of course, I'm asking the question with a human brain, you know, but what makes them want to come around? Okay, they came around, they saw you. Oh yeah. And then they went on with their business, but then they come back, and then they come back, and maybe they hang out with you for a dive. I've had that happen lots of times.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm moving, and so are they, but not away. They're moving right there.
Mm-hmm.
So if you dive with mantas, and particularly where you and I have been together, almost everybody will have that experience.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It is incredible.
Sarah says, hi, Bob. Thanks for everything you do. Have you ever seen cooperative feeding in oceanic mantas in Revia like we do with reef mantas?
That's also a really good question. And the image that I showed you of the cooperative feeding is in reef mantas. And as I said, it's only known to my knowledge in one place in the world. It may occur lots and lots of places, but it's only known in the Indian Ocean and the Maldives, to my knowledge. I have seen what I would call cooperative feeding, but it's not nearly as complex as what we see in those reef mantas. One of the reasons, and I don't know that this is necessarily a stopgap, but one of the reasons is that oceanic mantas rarely are in positions of small bays where they could create a vortex like this. You know, as you know, they're in open water. One of the things that we do see, which is, I think, cooperative feeding, is at San Benedicto, on the off side where the lava flow is, you notice that there are a number of finger-like bays in there between the lava flows. And mantas will swim into those bays, pushing a wave of water in front of them. And when it hits the beach, it will splash back at them. And of course, it's been pushed into a narrower channel, concentrating the plankton. So they're using the shape of the bay to aggregate the plankton, and then the return wave off the beach to gulp them. And we have also seen mantas feeding in echelon. Humpbacks do this. 3 animals will feed at the surface in a line, and they're pushing a wave, collecting plankton, and then one animal will pull out of the wave and swim back into the wave, facing the mantas that are pushing the wave, and gulp the wave. And so that seems to be some cooperative interaction. We haven't seen it long enough to see if they take turns at that, or it's just the guy on the end always gets full and everybody else just pushes. I don't know that, but that seems to be a cooperative effort. And humpbacks, other whales do it as well.
Amazing. Christine says, Bob, your passion is very well received. Thank you. Do you feel from experience that mantas are more receptive to free divers or snorkelers versus scuba divers due to the equipment surrounding the humans, and since they are more intuitive?
Also a really good question. And I have been diving with them, as you have, Jay, in both modes. Some very good work has been done free diving. As far as I can tell, they don't seem to distinguish between those two modes. We know, and I know you've had this experience, that some animals, hammerheads, hate bubbles. They really, you get in a big group of hammerheads, bubbles, and they flee. The only way to get great photographs, if you're a National Geo photographer or something, is to dive on rebreathers with hammerheads or to snorkel. And with mantas, it seems quite the opposite to me. They seem to like the bubbles. They will often follow the bubble train and come close to your exhalant and get the bubbles in their face and on their bellies. They maneuver to get them in those locations. So I really can't answer the question except from my experiences. I think the sheer number of people making bubbles is an interesting question, and we're worried a little bit about large numbers in the water. 40 people at one small location. Is it bad? Is it good? I'm not sure. We're starting to try and see regulations form to reduce that a little bit. And of course, your whole operation seems to be wonderfully focused on conservation and taking care of the world's oceans, which I applaud over and over when I talk about you. I tell everybody, look, this guy is the coolest guy I know. And in large part because he loves the ocean and he loves everything in it. And so therein lies your charm and so many other things as well. But I cannot answer directly that question. It's a very good question, and we're studying it. People that are concerned about conservation and habitat conservation as well.
Great. Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Gabrielle asks, thank you so much, Dr. Rubin and Jay. So inspiring. I felt so connected to the mantas that I had the opportunity to dive with in Sapporo. And I hope to someday I can join you both on a citizen science expedition. I'd love to take any additional courses that you even offer on Manta biology. Do you tend to see adults that form social groups in Socorro so that you see the same individuals together over and over? And if so, are they mixed gender?
Also a really good question. And I have not offered courses only in the biology of Manta, although it would be a fun thing to do now because we know so much more than we did when I started working on them. It lends itself to more discussion. But in answer to the specific question, we do see the same animals over and over. Males and females are not necessarily in groups, but sometimes they are. Males, and among sharks, as many of you know, males and females tend to segregate during the non-breeding season. And so females stay with the little guys and the males go off on their own, and they're two separate groups and they don't interact very much. When we see mantas, we do see both males and females together. We don't see pairs. And I think that's what your colleague is asking, where is this a male and a female pair? Or are these two females or three females? We always see Judy, Joan, and Ralph or something like that. And we don't see that. The mantas that we see at Socorro and at the islands come and go. And so that population is pretty big now. We know over 700 individuals that we've seen multiple times, one for almost 28 years now. And that's probably a longevity record for the species, only because we're old and we've worked on them for a long time. But we'll see them at periods of time. We do not necessarily see Bob and Jay together, except when they see actually Bob and Jay together. But if mantas are named Bob and Jay, sometimes we see Bob, sometimes we see Jay, sometimes we don't see either one of them. And sometimes we don't see them for 10 years. Where's Jay? Where the heck is Jay? I don't know. Maybe he's on vacation in Hawaii, but he's not here. And so on. So to answer your friend's question, we don't see those pairs. We've tested it statistically because we have so many animals. We can say, well, on this date, on these weekends, or this week that we were there, did we see over the years these two together? And the association seems to be non-correlated. And in reef mantas that seem to be very population specific, for example, in Hawaii, they don't even leave one island to go to another. So if they're, at Maui, they don't go to the big island, and so on and so forth. And so that's true of Yap, and it's true of other places as well. So the populations seem to be concentrated in relatively small numbers, and they don't appear to be nearly as migratory. These guys are probably pretty migratory, and they probably move over hundreds of miles, if not thousands. We now have records of them moving over hundreds of miles back and forth between the islands and Puerto Vallarta and down the coast of Mexico and so on. So 800 kilometers, back and forth, and very quickly. They're fast. But I think in places where reef mantas are congregated and not highly mobile, that may be another issue. And I don't look at reef mantas enough to spend time trying to segregate it out. Other people, I'm sure, know that. I think we would have it in the publications if people had shown it, and I'm not aware of it. Good question, great question.
So Ellen says, amazing ocean story. Thank you for your lifetime of work. Does the research show other methods of communication between mantas beyond their physical behavioral interactions?
I think the only thing that we can measure is behavior that would result in cooperative feeding, as we showed you, or pairing that we really have not much information for, and individual interactions between two animals that we often see but don't understand, where they'll swim straight at one another, and then at the 11th hour, they pull up like two fighter jets coming at high speed and then pulling up into the air to go backwards or to flip. And that's fairly common, and we don't know what it means. It may be showing pattern. It may be a form of recognition, but again, it's all behavioral. And of course, we see communication in their own minds with electrical signaling, electromagnetic signaling. After that, I don't have anything to offer. There is no sound that we know of. So that would negate a language character. And it's not that fish can't produce sounds. We know that fish can produce sounds, but they do it with their air bladder and their teeth primarily. And mantas only have one set of very small teeth, and they don't have an air bladder. But that doesn't mean they couldn't do something else. We just are unaware of it. And to my knowledge, and I would like to do this, so maybe you and I can do it sometime soon, I would like to have hydrophones in the water and see what we can see. We may just hear ourselves blow bubbles, but who knows?
No.
It hasn't been done to my knowledge.
That would be incredible. That's a great idea to do it next time we head back out to the islands.
I'd love to.
That would be amazing.
Next time we have arrangements to go together, I will take care of the acquisition of the equipment.
Sounds wonderful.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Awesome. So Coral asks, where can I learn more about mantas? And are individual divers able to contribute to the collection of information about mantas? How can we help?
Oh, yes, absolutely. In fact, I wouldn't know enough to put in a thimble if it wasn't for recreational divers and photographers, which we'll collectively call curious naturalists, people of goodwill. And we have identified hundreds of animals from the belly shots. As you know, the belly shots are individually specific. And so when you look at the color patterns and so on in manta, they are like a fingerprint. And so we began years ago recognizing that. It took me a year to realize that. You know, you give a guy a PhD and enough time, he may be able to find his way to the restroom. But it took us a year to realize that all those markings were different. And I gave a paper at a scientific meeting, and people didn't know very much about mantas, and they were making analogies to humpback tails. And we know that we recognize humpbacks by their fluke patterns, and they're individual. So you can find them all over the world and match them in a large database. Our database is now being used. We have over 35,000 photographs of tummies. And they're cataloged, of course, and they're put in series and matched, computer matched, and so on. So we can recognize them in different parts of the world. And now many of the transects that we have between Puerto Vallarta and the Revillagigedos, and also the Revillagigedos and up into the Sea of Cortez, around Cerralvo, those are IDs that have been made primarily from matching photographic images, so that people gave us those photographs. Some came from scientists, some came from researchers, but most of those 35,000 came from professional photographers and many people with just a little GoPro on a stick. And, you know, they're down there, and GoPros are actually very good, and we need great belly shots. And so a perfect belly shot, like the animal was flying in the sky, is worth its weight in gold to us. And you can, if you don't mind, talking to your folks when you have a moment after this about how to get things to us. You know how to get things to Carrie, and that's where the photos go. And we will acknowledge every photo. We will tell you who it is if we know it. If we know it and we've seen it once before, but we have to see it twice to give it a name. And if Jay sends us a photograph and it's the second image, then Jay gets to name the manta. And we'll keep you updated about, oh, we saw your manta, Kathy Lynn. Kathy Lynn was at Socorro last week, and we haven't seen her in 2 years since you sent it, so on and so forth. And we're happy to do that. And as I said to your friend that's asking, his commitment or a single picture is worth its weight in gold to us. We can't be out there all the time. And when we're there, we're often doing other things. So yes, and our ability to turn the Revillagigedos into a World Heritage Site took 3 years and came from photographs and understanding of the mantas. And so the mantas are responsible for saving the islands, if you will. So yes, we're happy to have any citizen help at any level. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, for everyone listening too, I just pasted the Facebook and Instagram pages for Pacific Manta Research Group into the chat. So make sure to give them a follow, and you can also reach out to them with questions or anything like that. If anyone is interested in submitting Manta images or anything like that, feel free to either shoot us an email or contact them, and I can send you the brochure and information that we have about how it works and everything like that, and how do you submit it and all that kind of stuff. So just feel free to give us a shout, and we're glad to get you all that information and everything like that. Perfect. Next one, we got a question from Sharks for Us. This is great talk. I got to swim in 2018 with an oceanic manta in the Gulf of California. It was a small 3-meter individual. Definitely was the most magnificent animal that I have swam with. Later on in 2019, I met Dr. Rubin at the first Latin American Elasmobrine Congress, and it is really inspiring for a young biologist like me listening to pioneers of these animals' research. And I bought the Manta Trust Mobuloid Guide with me, like you told me to buy, Bob. So no regrets. It's been well worth it. Thank you so much.
Well, you're certainly welcome. It was a pleasure meeting you. I met so many nice people at that particular conference. And I remember talking about the book. I think it may even been for sale at the conference. And Jay, you know that book, the little one that Guy put together. Mm-hmm. The big one is magnificent and has lots of information in it also. It has great pictures and so on, but the smaller one, which is relatively inexpensive and available in almost any bookstore, certainly by order, is inexpensive and wonderful. It's just the best thing that's ever been put together. And anybody that's interested in mantas can learn a tremendous amount in a relatively short period of time, mantas and mobulas. Mm-hmm. So I recommend that Guy's book highly. And yes, I tell your colleague there, if he can hear me, it was really nice meeting you. If I saw your face, I'm sure I would remember you. I met so many nice people. That was a great conference. Thank you.
Awesome. No, really great. Yeah, we have that book we keep it in our office. We have a couple copies of it that we bring with us on the tours and everything all the time. Really, really great book. All right, so we have Liza next. She says, hi there. As a dive instructor, I dove a whole season daily with oceanic mantas in Ecuador, and I saw firsthand their intelligence. Looking at them in the eye is life-changing. I also learned the reef manta is slightly more advanced than the oceanic based on the disappearance of the spike residue behind the fin. Is there data about a difference in their brains too? From what I gathered, oceanics are mainly solitary and reef display much more social behaviors. Does this show in their brains?
Really a good question. To my knowledge, that's never been examined. And I would guess that most of what we know about manta brains has come from reef mantas. Up until just a few years ago, as you realize, there was only one species, Manta birostris. Mm-hmm. And some work was done that suggests that the reef mantas are a different species, and so they were separated, and there are some differences. And as your listener colleague points out, the spine is the sting, if you will, the barb, is one of the differences. And so that while oceanic mantas don't have a barb, they have a big hump right in front, right near behind the dorsal fin. And if you were to look at that from behind, there's an indentation in the hump. If you were to dissect the hump, you find a remnant of the spine, which is like an appendix disappearing evolutionarily. And of course, as they moved off the bottom evolutionarily, they did not need a spine to protect themselves from attack from above, like stingrays do or bottom-dwelling rays do now. However, oceanic mantas don't show the spine, it's just a bulge. reef mantas don't have the bulge, and the largest spine to body size that I've ever seen is one about 8 or 9 inches long on a reef manta in the tropical Pacific. I did not personally see it, but I have a photo. I was shown a photograph of it by a good friend, and it was not worked up in Photoshop. It's a photograph that was taken. So I don't know if the disappearance of the barb has any evolutionary significance other than they're no longer dwelling on the bottom. But your friend's point is well made. I would not particularly attach a more advanced or less advanced character to that, but that has been suggested, and they are certainly more social. We're not talking about the reef mantas. They are more social. They hang out in groups, and the groups, as I said, with Hawaii and Yap and places, are small and continuous. And again, oceanic mantas don't do that to the same degree, although the fact that we have so much data over almost 40 years now, Jay, of the same animals coming back to the same spots suggests that they may have well-defined migratory pathways that bring them back, like seagulls or seals or other things, to the same sites after long distances of travel.
Awesome. Incredible. We're getting a little tight on time. We'll take maybe 2 or 3 more questions, and then we'll call it for today. So let's go with Jane. Jane says, thanks for sharing this fascinating information today. Do you think that mantas' seeming condition to not fear people and the curiosity towards humans makes them more vulnerable to fisheries?
Yes, in some cases, I do think that. I worry about it a little bit. They seem, at least at Socorro to some degree, to be habituated to people. Although there are many, many places in the world where animals mantas have seen many, many more people than they have seen at Socorro. The night dives in Hawaii and so on and so forth. And they come for different reasons. So if we move the lights at night in Hawaii and the plankton come to a different spot, that's where the mantas go. And the people follow because they want to take pictures and so on. We have had problems with mantas dying in nets. And I think that has less to do with their intrigue with humans than it does with the nets being left in the water or lost, and entanglement because they swim often so close to the surface. Not always. Mantas are known now to be deep divers. We have data for them, diving to 1,500 feet, and they probably dive much deeper than that. Mobulas are known down to 2,000, as you undoubtedly know from some of the recent work. But they spend a lot of time at the surface, and that creates the problem. The nets are right there. And they are vulnerable when they get in the nets because, one, they die, but also humans are pretty upset, fishermen particularly, and they often will kill them. They'll kill them with ramming rebars into their brains when they're stuck in the nets, or shooting them, and so on. And that's been a problem, but I don't think it has anything to do with the attractiveness to individuals. I hope not.
I do. Awesome. So we have one more question. We'll go from Maureen. It says, thank you for your amazing talk and for spreading your passion for mantas. What do you think about mantas breaching? Do you believe it's only a way to remove parasites or remoras, or a way to communicate, or is there also maybe part of this happiness?
Great question. And if I could do it, I would, every day, all day. Many of you that are divers and have seen the world's great creatures, you realize that there's a small group of animals that are smaller than the big mantas. So 2 species of big mantas. Oceanic mantas are about up to 20 22 feet across, and reef mantas maybe to 13, 15, something like that. 2 different species. But there's another group that we collectively call devil rays or mobulas, and as opposed to mantas. And they're all in the same genus now. They're all closely related. But the mobulas range in size from 1.5 feet across to about 10 feet. And there are 9 species that we recognize. And those are the guys that jump and breach, that spin. You know, you've seen this in Baja, Jay. They spin and crash down into the water. And the only thing that I see in common with the way they do that is that they're doing it. That is to say, I've tried to look for the different types of entries. Do you hit with your belly? Do you hit with your back? Do you curl up your fins? Is it face first? And so on. And I can't see any difference. It's interpreted as being courtship or announcement behavior. Big mantas are probably too big to breach. They will come up and flop forward. And I have seen one video of a manta coming up high enough to turn. Not like mobulas, not flying in the sky, you know, and so on and so forth. And we don't know what that breaching behavior is about. The people that have worked on mobulas, and there are some that have done some really good work, young people in Mexico that are just the greatest kids and the great scientific expertise, working really hard, tell me that they don't know what it's about either, and they can't correlate it with anything except the aggregations. You know, you've got that beautiful aggregation behind you as an image, and when they're in the aggregations, they breach. It's rare to see a mobula jump and breach it by itself. It doesn't mean it can't happen, but it's not nearly as common. When they're together, that's when you see most of it. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I wish I could answer it very clearly and say, oh yes, they do this because this and this, but I don't know that. And I think it has very little to do with parasite removal. Mantas and mobulas are covered with parasites, and they're small. They're copepods, little tiny guys. And the greatest concentration are on the remoras, not on the mantas themselves. In a mucus, they're feeding on the mucus, but I see no data for that, and that doesn't mean it doesn't occur. We just haven't got any data for it.
Mm-hmm. Now, even like the experience, I mean, I've seen, well, mobulas I see a lot here in Baja all the time, and I've seen that from underwater, above water, etc. And then this year in Socorro, we've seen a few breaches from oceanics, and the movement of it, or I don't know how to say the word I'm looking for, but it looks very different underwater and above water. Like the oceanic they kind of more just powered in straight up and then kind of fall back into the water or fall forward into the water. Whereas with the mobula, or like the monkiana, the monk's devil rays and all that, it's almost like it has a style to it. Like it's almost like a dance. Like they kind of speed up and like spin through the water and then launch out of the water and begin to keep, you know, going with the fins and everything.
They're flying in the air. They're running their wings in the air. Often. Yeah. I have not seen, except on one occasion, the kind of breach that you've just described for oceanic mantas.
Okay.
I haven't seen it. I've seen them come up and kind of push over. Mm-hmm. But nothing where I could even see the gills, you know, nothing that they were high enough for me to even see the gill bars. So I can't comment on it very much. And what I need to do is I need to live at Socorro for 2 years and just go out every day, you know, and watch. I mean, the best kind of biology in arenas like this is to watch. Mm-hmm. You know, open your eyes and look at the animal. And, you know, of course, you guys are diving, you're curious naturalists, you know more about these animals' behavior probably than I do. And I'll tell you who really knows, and those are the fishermen. Mm-hmm. The fishermen know a lot of natural history. They don't realize they know it, I guess, but maybe they do. But you can ask those guys all kinds of questions, and you get answers that you've never expected or never seen. So thanks for that. And I'm going to quote you. Oh yeah, in print. J. Clue, personal communication, mantis breach, and so on. Yeah.
I'll send you I've got a video of it from the last trip. I'll send it over to you.
I'd love to see it, Jay. I'd love to see it.
It's a pretty cool shot. It was really incredible. We were, 3-4 meters under the surface, and the Manta just was coming by and then just powered up and up out of the water. It was really cool. I'll send it over so you can check it
Well, I
out.
bet. I would love to see it.
Awesome. I'll get it over to you ASAP then. So everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. That's all the time we have for today. We're a little bit over time already. Bob, thank you so much for taking the time and staying with us and everything and answering all these questions and everything too.
Thank you, Jay. And thank you, your friends and colleagues on Zoom. Tell them I really enjoyed this afternoon or this morning. And I think we all should go diving together.
I think it sounds like a great idea. As soon as this is all over, we should all get out to Socorro together.
I think we should. Dora would love to have us all.
Oh, exactly. We'll have to get up with Dora and got out on the Kino or the Rocio.
Okay, awesome. Man. Thanks so much for everything. I wish you well and my best to your friends on television there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody. If you want to send some questions to the Pacific Manta Research Group, you can message them on Facebook and Instagram. I pasted their links into the chat and all that. So if you have any other questions or anything like that, you can hit them up and they'll gladly try to get your answers and everything.
And I'll answer them in type and get them back.
Perfect. Sounds good.
Great. Take care.
Awesome. And then let me paste in Gmail real quick. Carrie just sent over your Gmail. So here is an email from Carrie, also from the Pacific Manta Research Group. Cool. Thank you so much for everyone tuning in today. Thank you again, Bob. We'll see everybody.
Welcome, thank you.
Have a great day, everyone. Take care and have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you guys soon. Take care.